Well, this is our second video from Midwest Center for Constitutional Rights. This is Richard Oliveto. Come tonight to you on September 9th, 2025. And as usual, we have some unusual news happening in the Mideast. The world has woken up to it and is well aware of it. The Pope has spoken, EU has spoken, other nations have spoken, even the White House has somewhat uh, distance themselves from what Israel did and another extreme violation to international law and international standards and state sovereignty of a completely peaceful, non-combatant nation by invading their airspace, piercing their territory without warning, and attacking a peace negotiating team of Hamas that's been a peace negotiation centerpiece. And all the negotiations, all the main negotiations have occurred in Doha and Qatar. And this time, Israel says that they were going after the Hamas leadership, which is kind of duplicitous because the warring Hamas leadership, they claim, has been killed for the most part. That is, Sanwar and some of his lieutenants, they have been killed in the past. But obviously, Hamas is still an active fighting force. But what makes this so egregious and disturbing in an international observer's eyes is that this particular strike done this morning was done again in a pattern-like process where the Arab nation involved, which is Hamas's Palestinian representative, is involved in a peace negotiation proposed and promoted by the US. This sounds very similar to what happened to the Hezbollah chief, wherein Hezbollah and actually even Iran, they were involved in negotiations. Iran was discussing parameters of a peace also, and they were literally, reportedly in Hezbollah's case in Lebanon, the head of Hezbollah at the time had just agreed to a ceasefire with Israel and his group in the southern Lebanon, and he was actually at ease about thinking about pulling back across the blue line, as they call it, in southern Lebanon and northern Israel. And it appeared that hostilities were coming to somewhat of a status quo in southern Lebanon when suddenly Israel strikes Beirut in the headquarters of Hezbollah buried under the ground, and they dropped 6 major bunker blasting bombs, probably made by the U.S., and they kill him, the leader of Hezbollah. Again, reportedly soon after, or at the time that he tacitly had agreed to a ceasefire with Israel the day before. Now, in Iran's case, there's a very clear U.S. involvement where this Steve Wycoff, who seems to be the merchant of death, even though he talks peace, he's Jewish, he goes to the Mideast, he's negotiating. They have 6 separate negotiations with Iran. Trump comes out, and the State Department come out and say on like a Thursday, well, we're going to have one more negotiations, and it'll be on Sunday because we have a delay, and we're going to have a final consultation with Iran's peace team on Sunday. Wyckoff says this, Trump says this, Weissman says this. On Friday night, Israel strikes at the heart of the Iran's military structure, killing women and children, families of the officers and other senior commanders, destroying entire city blocks, sending drones right into people's living rooms. while they were at home, thinking that they were in some sort of a security status where there was at least a pause and a serious effort going on between Wycoff, the Jew, US diplomat, so-called negotiator, who lulled them into a false sense of potential peace or ceasefire or reducing tensions between Iran and Israel. And yet, in that very moment, created that pause and that, we might say, relaxation and letting their guard down, all done and prospered by the Jewish diplomat called Steve Wycoff, Trump's billionaire friend. They get wiped out in terms of like 12 commanders get wiped out, and their families and their children and neighbors die too. Well, it seems like this happened again today. Wycoff again is involved. Trump's State Department comes up with a peace proposal. They present it to Hamas's senior negotiating team, which has been always centered in Doha. Everyone knows that. Doha being a U.S. ally, a U.S. neutral ground. Our largest Air Force base in the Mideast is supposedly in Doha. And yet, while they're quote-unquote gathered to review the peace proposal, the latest one given by this Jewish diplomat called Steve Wycoff, who's not, by the way, Senate approved. He's not part of the State Department. He's just this rich Jew who goes around the Mideast pretending that he's for peace. And he seems to get the ear of Hamas. And he knows how to schmooze these people into some sort of a law, like he did in Iran, like he did in Lebanon. And once again, knowing that they're getting together to review this, the senior political structure of Hamas and negotiators, peace negotiators, people who have actually negotiated the release of numerous dozens of Israeli hostages, who have repeatedly sought for the release of all hostages if Israel would just withdraw from Gaza and stop their hostilities. They've said this for almost 18 months now. These are the same negotiators that one of Trump's former younger diplomats, who was a genuine State Department diplomat and a true negotiator, who was fired soon after he'd made an appearance on CNN and said, well, they don't wear horns and they're actually fairly intelligent people. He told Jake Trapper, when Trapper was questioning, why could you meet with Hamas, these baby killers? And the man says, my job is to meet with people so we can have peace. And by the way, Jake, they don't have horns. They are intelligent people, and they do represent a significant political structure in the Mideast, and we're trying to get peace to happen, so you do have to meet with them. And as soon as he said that, he was fired within 2 days. When he said, we're negotiating with Hamas because we're not an agent of Israel. And that's what got him fired. He said explicitly, we're not an agent of Israel. Well, he didn't realize that his job was going to be taken away from him by AIPAC and all the billionaire Jewish lobbyists in Washington and around the country. They couldn't have a senior critical negotiator who said he had done this in other war-torn conflicts areas in the world, saying that we're not an agent. The U.S. itself is not an agent of Israel, that they have a right to negotiate with whoever they want to, because there was an American involved in the negotiations that was being held hostage. So Israel was displeased that we met with Hamas and tried to negotiate a peace deal. Wycoff does this recently again, and these people, Hamas, in good faith, meet in a neutral country, which has been the centerpiece of all negotiations. And Qatar's diplomat and foreign secretary is absolutely brilliant, and he's actually reasonable, speaks really good English. I've seen him numerous times on major networks and in reports, and his statements are very crystalline clear, and they're very independent, and they're very neutral, and they're trying to bring peace of a very complex situation, at least a ceasefire. And so he gathers these people together, and thank God he wasn't in the room. But apparently Israel strikes them obviously they said immediately in the early news this morning, right before 10 o'clock a.m. our time, Eastern Standard Time, Israel actually says we carried this out with a green light from Washington, that we had a green lit decision from the Trump administration, that the Trump administration was aware of it. Netanyahu says this. The Israeli military says we did this in cooperation with the U.S. It was planned. They greenlit it. We couldn't have done it without it. Many people, observers, have said there's no way Israel would do such an act on Qatar without Trump knowing about it or his administration knowing about it. Well, because of the fallout and the flagrant violation of a nation's sovereignty, an independent peacemaking nation that's played a central role for 20 months in this conflict, has repeatedly negotiated with Hamas and Israel representatives, and repeatedly has achieved ceasefires, has repeatedly obtained Israeli hostage releases by the dozens and thousands of Palestinian prisoners, and the end of hostilities for months at a time, especially around the time Trump entered office. It's this country that Trump went to, and he was given the red carpet treatment about 3 months ago in his Mideast tour. And yet, somehow, they greenlight an Israeli strike on a sovereign nation's capital, housing diplomats and representatives of two enemy combatants, that ends up with the deaths of 5 people at least and 1 Qatar diplomat. Apparently at this time, Hamas's leadership avoided the decapitation strike, but 5 of their negotiators or underlings were killed. One was a chief negotiator. And I'm going to play now a video that would capture this moment of the strike and some commentary that was played on CNN earlier today.
This is an absolutely extraordinary moment that we are witnessing right now. A very large plume of smoke above the Qatari capital of Doha, and paired with that an Israeli military statement saying that they have, quote, conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organization, end quote. I have just gotten off the phone with an Israeli official who confirmed to me that that statement is indeed about that very same blast in Doha, meaning that the Israeli military, not even Israel's intelligence service, but its military, actually conducted a strike in Qatar targeting Hamas's leadership. Doha, the Qatari capital, is where several senior Hamas leaders are currently based and have been based throughout much of this war in Gaza, namely Hamas's leader, Khalil al-Hayya. Khalil al-Hayya has been not only Hamas's leader in the wake of the killing of Yahya Sinwar, but he has also been the chief negotiator, engaged not only through the mediators, but also at times with U.S. officials in negotiations over the future of the war in Gaza. It's unclear as of now what the results of this strike were, whether or not Hamas's leadership in Doha has been killed.
So we're back, and that was this moment of the strike, and in fact, the chief negotiator was killed, later confirmed, along with 4 other Hamas diplomats or representatives, you might call them. And there was one allegedly, reportedly so far, a Qatar citizen or diplomat. It's been widely condemned throughout the world. Even Britain said it would criticize Israel for the strike, which is unusual because just yesterday they declined, for some ungodly reason, to state what's happening in Gaza as a genocide against most of the world opinion, including all the top genocide scholars that have, including Jewish scholars, hundreds of them. They came out recently and said it is a genocide. Yet somehow the British government, like the U.S. government, can't quite get to see what the rest of us, I guess, to see, and the starvation and the killing of children and the sniping of children. You just can't quite. They can't quite get there to call Israel committing a genocide, even though the World Court has said the evidence has presented in court in fact, by many lawyers around the world, presenting a very powerful case on behalf of South Africa last year. It voted 15-1 that there was a presumption that what's happening there is going towards a genocide. That was a year ago. But Britain, even Britain today, condemned this strike, and so did Spain, the Pope, the EU in general, all the Arab states. The Prince of Saudi Arabia said there will not be any normalizations with Israel, not only by their plans to annex the West Bank, which was yesterday he said this, but if they decide to annex, he says, but now he's roundly criticized Israel for the strike on his neighbor and his close ally in the region. The Arab states have to be absolutely terrified of what's next with Israel. They have hit at least 5 states now. You have Syria not long ago. You had Lebanon, Iran. They hit groups in northern Iraq. And now they took out a peace negotiating country, the country that is everyone understands is the centerpiece of all negotiations. So who would want to negotiate with Israel? Who would trust Steve Wycoff in that region anymore when he offers you a peace plan and goes back and tells Israel where the peace plan is being reviewed? You know that happened. I don't care what any pundit, any organization says, whatever Wycoff says, whatever Trump says from the White House. Israel knew exactly where these men were meeting to review those plans. They vault their great Mossad and their great intelligence. It's called Steve Wycoff, the billionaire friend of Trump. I'm sure he put a phone call in about 10 minutes before the strike, just making sure they were all in a room together, so he can call. Probably on the phone on a conference call was Bibi's IDF commanders. So it's ridiculous to talk about Israel's great intelligence when they strike at will. They do these murderous acts. These are flagrant violations. If any other nation in Europe would just decide to strike out against a neighboring nation that's in the middle of peace negotiations and take out the leadership of an enemy combatant inside of a Switzerland or a Brussels, where they do have the Hague, it'd be like the equivalent of hitting Brussels or the Hague or Switzerland in the middle of a peace negotiation. It'd be outrage. There'd be considerations of war. Let's say Russia would strike a peace delegation of Ukraine anywhere in Europe. They were discussing the potential for peace or ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Let's say Russia would take out their negotiators. There would be instant declarations of war against Russia. On the other hand, anyone in the world understands that to strike negotiators who are trying to review a U.S. policy proposed plan of ceasefire and they'd be killed in that process, it just reeks of Iran, what happened in Iran several months ago. It reeks of what happened in southern Lebanon with the Hezbollah. It's the same pattern. Who, in fact, Scott Ritter, I'm sure all the brilliant commentators on the left, you might say, or the people who just know and observe these things, from Professor Sachs to John Mersheimer to Larry Johnson, the CIA, the Judd Napolitano, on and on, all of them know Colonel McGregor to do this kind of an act is basically egging on a regional war. Israel wants more war. Netanyahu wants to continue war. He revels in the violence. He revels in the murdering. of people who otherwise are hard at work trying to figure out how to bring the bloodshed in Gaza to an end. Even among the Israeli soldiers who are burning out in record numbers, who are committing suicide by dozens every month, are sick of that Gaza war themselves, if the truth be known. The real death toll among the IDF soldiers isn't allowed out into the public by Netanyahu's government. Israel will never tell you how many of their soldiers are suffering from PTSD. Estimates by their own news organizations say it's over 10,000 and counting. And that was months ago. 5,000 casualties, at least 5,000 dead IDF, from what they can gather. Wounded go into 10 or 15,000. And Netanyahu wants to continue on this for his own personal ambitions. In the right-wing slaughterhouse that's called the Israeli government, which our great Christian evangelical movement in this country can't get enough of supporting and thinking that it's all biblical, because by murdering children and murdering women and starving the population of Gaza, Jesus is going to love it, and he's going to want to return and pat Netanyahu on the head and just bless Israel and bless all those who gave bombs to kill the poor, defenseless women and children and doctors and journalists of Gaza. Jesus is really into that, and I'm sure the Christian evangelical movement in this country just thinks it's wonderful that Israel can kill and maim babies by the thousands. And then, so Trump's biggest influencer, the nut job, who comes up and rises up in this country and influences Trump enough, in the State Department enough, to stop from having Gaza seriously wounded children with amputations from being treated in American hospitals. She literally stops this. That's the power of the ignorance of where the U.S. is today. It's a fearsome thing to be in a country that's this ignorant. We have so many intelligent people, so many people of goodwill, so many serious Christians who really believe in the right of in the justice being done on this earth. And yet you have this leadership in Washington, in Congress, because of the money that AIPAC pays and other billionaires pay to the Republican juggernaut that's living, that runs this country right now. And prior to him, some of the Democrats too. You have this ugly status happening where people are given a U.S. peace proposal. It wasn't an Israeli peace proposal. It was a U.S. peace proposal that brought these people into a room this morning to seriously hammer out a potential ceasefire in Gaza to stop the bloodshed and the starvation. And what does Israel do? The knowledge given to them by U.S., they slaughter and they do violence to the 5 people who were in that room reviewing the US Wycoff plan, as it's called. That's where we're at as a Christian nation. I hope Mike Johnson loves his right-wing sermons. I hope Trump finds himself ever blessed because he's blessing Israel so much for their starvation of the population. That he told Netanyahu, as Netanyahu confirmed 2 weeks ago, he told Netanyahu, get it over with in Gaza and do it fast. And they're trying very hard to get it over with in Gaza and do it fast. I say these things tonight because, well, far from perfect and far from a perfect human being, as I grow a little bit older in my life, my faith is even more important to me than ever. And it's always been with me since I was a young man, young teenager. And I've been around a lot of different evangelical churches, some I really respect. I've learned a lot from some really powerful Protestant preachers. I was raised Catholic. I still believe in the Catholic theology in many ways. But the bottom line is, we are in a very, very, very dark era. And if you want to believe that Satan is alive and well, as Billy Graham would say, as Billy Graham preached, Satan is the prince of the air, as the scriptures. He quoted the scriptures. This is his kingdom. This is not America's kingdom. This isn't Israel's kingdom. This is what the scriptures say. This world's prince is not Jesus Christ. And it certainly isn't Trump's, and it certainly isn't Netanyahu's. It's something far, far darker and far more menacing. And one day they're going to meet that prince face to face, I have a feeling. And they're going to have to live with him for a long, long time. That's enough for the Midwest Center and my religious statement on the day that Israel violates a sovereign Arab state's sovereignty to kill peace negotiators, given reviewing a U.S. peace proposal. And we'll see what happens in the next few days. We have to stay tuned. Thank you.